The fact that I'm not the sharpest and smartest knife in the drawer, I admit. And it won't do you any good if you keep repeating it. It may have taken me a few years to realize this. And now that I know what was going on, behind my back, I'm going to need help figuring out what to do next. Of course, I still love this fool, but I don't like her at all anymore. And what about the children? What should I do with these two? When I think about my children, the bile in my stomach starts to rise, and I have to run to the toilet to pour out a $30 Jack Daniels. I finish throwing up, go to the sink to rinse my mouth and wash my face before returning to the bar and ordering another double portion. Now I'm going to have to start all over again if I'm going to get drunk, but I probably should stay sober for a while. When the bartender returns with my double portion, I ask for a notepad and pen to start. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Simon Messina, and I've been married to Janice for the last 9 years. Janice and I first met a little over 10 years ago when I was injured at work. I cut my hand with a chisel and had to get stitches to stop the bleeding, and Janice worked as a nurse in the emergency room. She was very professional, although I tried my best, but I couldn't get her to see me as more than a patient. She was a beauty, long dark hair in a ponytail, 170 centimeters tall, long legs, athletic build. I stared into her brown eyes as she concentrated on giving me a shot of Novocaine to numb the flea pain before I got stitches. Isn't it funny that as soon as you notice a person, you start seeing them more often? Something like when you decide to buy a certain type of car, and then you start seeing that car everywhere you go. Well, that was the case with Janice. I started seeing her in town, usually with some guy, and they looked happy together. One evening they were at a tavern that I frequented. I watched Janice and her boyfriend start making a little noise, and then the guy got up and left. Janice stayed at the table with her friends, looking angry. I turned away before she noticed me, but I tried my best to listen, which wasn't that hard because Janice was a little drunk and noisy. The gist of her tirade boiled down to the following. He's a jealous jerk, and I'm getting tired of it. I decided to leave before my eavesdropping became obvious. It must have been 2 weeks before I saw her at the bar again, this time with her girlfriends and without a boyfriend. The band started playing a song that I could dance to, and I went over to her table. I don't know if you remember me from the emergency room a couple of months ago. My name is Simon, and I'm wondering if you'd like to dance. She looked at me for a second before answering. Yes, the guy with the cut hand. Sure, let's dance. My life with Janice started at that moment, and I thought I was the happiest man in the world. We dated for a month before there was any intimacy between us. She didn't seem to be in a hurry, and I didn't insist. The first time we made love was something out of a romance novel. We had dinner at an Italian restaurant where there was great pasta, 2 bottles of excellent red wine, and tiramisu for dessert. It wasn't my intention to get Janice drunk, but deep down I hoped to loosen her restraint a little. We returned to my apartment, and even before the door closed, Janice was in my arms, imprinting the hottest kiss on my lips. I've probably slept with 10 women up to this point, but nothing prepared me for that night. Janice was a firework. Simon, let's go to bed. I picked Janice up by her buttocks, literally because she was wearing a thong, and carried her to my bed. The rest of our clothes quickly ended up on the floor. The best part was that Janice talked very loudly about what gave her pleasure. I've had women who cried out to Jesus and women who didn't make a sound. What is it about women that they can't help you please them? I don't understand this. I don't order their food when we go to a restaurant, and I don't choose a TV show or movie without asking their opinion. So, what makes a woman think that I know where to put my tongue and fingers when we're... And that's what Janice did. She gave me hints that night and any night I needed them. It made me feel like the #1 stud. Not only that, but what Janice was so willing to share. I felt I could do the same. I didn't care where Janice mastered her talents in the bedroom or in any other room that we christened over the next few months, as long as she was exclusively mine now. Everything pointed to the fact that she was mine. She never gave me any reason to doubt her. For months after that first night, I invited Janice to dance at the tavern where we danced together for the first time and asked her to marry me. She said yes, and we set the date for the first Saturday in June. About 2 months after our engagement, I was sitting in the same tavern with a good friend when Janice's ex-boyfriend walked past our table on his way out. He stopped and looked at me. "You're Janice's fiancé, aren't you?" "Yes, I hope we won't have any problems." "Was she and I didn't start dating until you two broke up for a few weeks?" "No, we had our reasons for breaking up. Or at least I had my reasons. I just wish you all the best if you two get married, especially considering her peculiarities when it comes to exclusivity." With that, he walked out the door. I decided it was just a bitter sob and shook my head. There are a few more things about my past life that you need to know, because they will become important later. First of all, I was a very good wrestler in my youth. In high school, I was involved in wrestling for 4 years, and I was given a scholarship to a state university. Everything was going great until my last year. I was wrestling with a guy from our rival state competition and was leading him on points when the lights went out in my head. It turns out that this asshole was so angry about losing to me that he kneed me in the balls. I spent the next 2 days in the hospital where they pumped blood out of my scrotum. When I recovered, I dropped out for the rest of the season, lost all interest in school, and eventually dropped out of college and got a job with a local builder. In case you're wondering, another wrestler was eventually kicked out of the team and lost his scholarship. I was asked if I wanted to press assault charges, but I didn't, to put it all behind me. Secondly, my father died when I was 12 years old, and my mother died 10 years later. Since I had no siblings, and my parents were not close to their extended families, it left a huge hole in my heart until many years later I met Penny, Janice's mother, and became attached to her as a surrogate parent. Janice's father left the family when Janice was still a teenager, so there were only 3 of us. Janice sent her father birthday and Christmas cards every year, but she never received a reply from him. He did not attend our wedding and did not even send a note in response to our invitation. Her mother walked her down the aisle and married her off. I earn my living as a carpenter finisher, specializing in restoration work. I am one of the best on the West Coast, and most of my work is related to the restoration of old mansions that were bought by rich people with too much money. Since I can charge from $75 to $100 an hour, I earn about $150,000 a year. Not bad for a not-too-gifted college dropout. Unfortunately, this means that I need to travel and spend 1 or 2 weeks away from home every month. The difficulty of working for rich people is that they can treat you either as a commoner or as an invisible man. For example, I worked for a 20-year-old actress in Los Angeles. She just bought this 1,000-square-meter house and spent another couple of million on its restoration. More than once, she hung out by the pool completely naked while I was working inside. She wasn't trying to seduce me. She was just treating me like I was invisible. Another time I was working on a house in Beverly Hills, and something similar happened. Only this time, I watched the mistress of the house making love to a boy by the pool, in broad daylight. What really pissed me off was that I liked her husband. He was one of those guys who talked to me as an equal. Here is this rich Hollywood producer. He comes home from work, opens 2 beers, and asks me how my day was and how the work is going, offering me 1 beer. And I really liked him because his fridge was full of domestic, long-necked beer. Not this crappy imported shit that we drank straight from the bottles. I was embarrassed that his old lady cheated on him while he was at work, but I didn't say anything in case it was their deal. You know, one of those open marriage agreements or something like that. And I didn't want to look him in the eye when I spoke, in case it wasn't an arrangement he agreed to. Your wife is making love to a billiard player and watching the guy crumble. So I followed the coward's path and anonymously called his office after finishing work and receiving the check. I tried to disguise my voice as best I could and told him the news. He thanked me, and 2 weeks later I read that he was getting a divorce. I guess it wasn't their agreement after all. Anyway, back to my current problem. Janice and I have 2 children. Okay, this is the part where you realize how damn stupid I can be. But before you judge me too harshly, please remember that when my first child was born, Janice and her mother were my universe. It was 3 years after the wedding when Janice told me she was pregnant. I was taller than a kite. I'm finally going to have a family. I spent weeks putting the nursery in order. All the oaks stuck out and fancy trim on the windows and doors. It was wonderful. On Jacob's birthday, I got a call at work saying Penny was taking Janice to the hospital. Her water broke and it's time. I specifically made sure that I only had local jobs scheduled for a month before and after the due date. So I was actually in the hospital and in the delivery room within half an hour of Penny's call. Janice was prepared and ready to give birth. I replayed all of Lama's lessons in my head, preparing to prepare her for this blessed. 3 hours later, the doctor said, "Here we are," and little Jacob emerged from it. I know that many new fathers can breathe quickly, feeling dizzy, and some even lose consciousness from this ordeal. But this does not even come close to describing how I felt when the nurse handed Jacob to me and asked me to hand him over to his mother. I had to quickly hand it over before I dropped it, because Jacob looked like he was at least partially black. Janice and Penny looked at Jacob at the same time, then at me before Penny said, "We need to talk." Penny took me out of the maternity ward and told me why my son looked like that. "Simon, I'm sorry we kept this from you, but now you need to know the truth. My father was a man of mixed race. His mother was black and his father was white. We should have told you this before you married Janice, but we were worried that you might not marry her, knowing that she was partially black." "It doesn't make any sense, Penny. Why should it matter to me? What made you think that?" "Well, because you told us that the guy who ended your college wrestling career was black." "Yes, but I never attached much importance to his skin color. I was just telling you both what happened and who did it. You've never heard a single racist word come out of my mouth. Well, that's good, Simon, because your son will need your full love and acceptance for who he is. Janice and I have never told you about my brother who lives in Denver." Penny reached into her wallet and pulled out a picture of a dark-skinned man. "This is my brother Henry. He's a couple of years younger than me, and it was always a problem when our family was out in public because he was so dark and I was white. You won't be able to believe how rude people can be who stare at us or even come up to us and ask personal questions. My mom and dad eventually moved to San Francisco because it was more tolerable there in the heel 60s. I listened to Penny's story and it seemed reasonable enough to me. Besides, I didn't want to be one of those rude, bigoted people she was talking about, so I left it at that. I finally got the chance to meet Penny's brother on the first Christmas after Jacob was born. Janice introduced him to me as Uncle Henry. Henry mentioned that he was leaving Denver and returning to Portland to be closer to his family. A month later, Henry moved into Penny's house. After that, Uncle Henry came to visit us every few weeks because he showed an active interest in Jacob. At the same time, I watched Penny and her brother several times, which made me feel uncomfortable. They never crossed the line of a relationship, but they seemed awfully close to siblings. I admit, one day when we were at Penny's house for a barbecue and everyone else was in the backyard, I took the opportunity to look into the bedrooms. After spending a minute in Penny's room and then Henry's, I relaxed because it turned out that each of them had their own separate rooms. But appearances can be deceiving. After the birth of my second child, a girl whom we named after my mother Ginny, I decided that a family of 4 was the right size. We had 2 healthy children, a boy and a girl. Who could have asked for more? I discussed this with Janice, and she agreed that we could stop having children and focus on raising the 2 wonderful children we had. When I suggested a vasectomy, Janice insisted on installing an IUD instead, so we could always change our minds in the future. That's what we did. After 2 wonderful years of family life, I was working on a restoration project for a sweet middle-aged lady and her husband. Sharon and Tim were both obstetricians and gynecologists. One afternoon, the 3 of us discussed things that I would be comfortable discussing only with doctors. I told Sharon that Janice had been using an IUD for the past 2 years, and she suggested an alternative, as an IUD can sometimes cause problems for a woman if used for too long. Her suggestion was that I go ahead and have a vasectomy, but freeze my fluid just in case. I liked the idea and decided that I would surprise Janice with my vasectomy on Valentine's Day. Well, it's not the most romantic gift, but it's better than a washing machine or a vacuum cleaner. My doctor gave me a recommendation for a clinic where they could save my fluid and perform a vasectomy. The doctor at the clinic told me that it would take several visits to collect the fluid, so I made an appointment for the next 3 Fridays. It was quite strange to enter the small room they had set up for the gathering. I read some pretty crazy stories in Pinhouse magazine. I liked the story in which the wife brought her best friend home and 2 women gave her husband the night of his life. I gave the nurse my sample and told her I would be back next week. She was a beautiful woman. I got a call on Tuesday morning, and the doctor asked if I could come in the afternoon or the next day. I asked if we could discuss this over the phone, and he replied that it was better to talk in person. I said that I would be there in the afternoon, but in the meantime, I thought that some kind of cancer had been found in my fluid or something like that. My father died when he was 34 years old, so I've been waiting for something like this for most of my life. I went to the clinic trying to think about how I was going to take care of my family's well-being. The doctor greeted me with a handshake and immediately got down to business. Have you ever had a scrotum injury? When I was struggling, a guy kicked me in the balls, and they swelled so much that I was hospitalized for a while. I replied, well, it's more than likely that it caused you fertility problems. The amount of your fluid is so low that it is extremely unlikely that you could have fathered any children if it had not been done in a test tube. But doc, that's impossible. I have 2 kids at home. He looked at me with pity in his eyes. And that's when the full force of the lies that were my marriage and my life came crashing down on me like a ton of bricks. Needless to say, I canceled the rest of my appointments and my vasectomy. I walked out of the clinic like a zombie from The Walking Dead. I had to figure out some way to find out the truth about my life without telling Janice. I spent the rest of the day sitting in a bar across the street from the clinic with a notepad and a bartender's pen. Someone once told me that the best way to get things done is to make a list of what you need to do. That's where I started. I finished my double-jacked annuals and reread my list. Behave naturally. Check the kids. Call Fred. Open a personal checking account. Talk to her father. Protect your assets. Get tested for sexually transmitted diseases. Find a place to live. Find out why. Take revenge. I put a double interval between each position in case I missed something and had to add it after talking to Fred, my friend who just went through a divorce. The next day, I woke up with a severe headache and started working on the list. Janice told me all sorts of nonsense about how I came home drunk last night, and I tried my best to pretend that nothing had happened. I lied to Janice for the first time that day, saying that Fred was in a sad mood and that we got drunk together. That evening, before and after dinner, I spent in the garage repairing my work tools. When I came to dinner, I praised Janice for the cooked food, asked Jacob about his day at kindergarten, and made eyes at my 2-year-old daughter. The hardest part was later, when it was time to go to bed. I resigned myself and climbed into Janice's bed, kissed her good night, and pretended to fall asleep. I took swabs of the children's saliva and one of my own. I took the samples to the clinic. The next one was a visit to the bank to open your personal checking account. I called Janice to tell her that I had an urgent repair for an important client in Los Angeles and that I would be gone for 2 or 3 days. Instead, I booked a plane ticket to the Keys to meet my father-in-law, whom I had never met before. I realized that for the first time in my life, a lie was coming out of my mouth. I can't say that lying was pleasant, but now it seemed necessary. I called my buddy Fred from the airport while waiting for my flight. I needed his support if my own marriage was going down the same path. Fred was at work and couldn't really get into it, so he planned to meet when I got back from Florida. He swarmed a secrecy about our conversation. Larry Adonios operated a charter fishing boat from Key Largo. He was surprised by my phone call, but didn't seem surprised when I asked him if we could meet to talk. He set aside an afternoon for us based on my expected arrival. I flew to Miami, rented a car and a hotel room to spend the night, and the next day went to his marina. Larry brought his boat to the dock at noon sharp. 2 of his clients got off the boat, each with a bunch of fish. Larry was a handsome man, 180 centimeters tall, slender, with a shock of gray hair and a deep tan of a Greek fisherman. He looked around before he recognized me. Janice must have sent him our Christmas card with a family photo. He came over and held out his hand to shake mine. Nice to meet you, Simon. I assume this is not a pleasure visit. He is not one of those who is shy in his expressions. I briefly explained to him why I was there. Wait a minute, did Penny tell you that Henry was her brother? Larry asked the question and barely kept a smile on his face. He is not her brother, but her lover over and over again. And the reason why we are not married. Everyone thinks I was a big asshole for abandoning my family, But let me tell you why I'm here in Key Largo. Larry told me his sad story. Janice started playing basketball in elementary school, and by the time she got into high school, she was good enough to get on the traveling AAU team. It was a bit difficult for us financially, because I insisted that her mother travel with her and act as a chaperone. We thought it would be worth it if Janice could get a college scholarship. So I stayed at home and worked overtime. While Janice and Penny spent at least 2 weekends a month away from home, I really wasn't worried about Penny leaving because I had a good relationship with Janice. And I assumed she would keep an eye on me and let me know if her mom started showing interest in one of the fathers. And in the first year, I think everything was fine. But in the second year, everything went wrong. State teams of boys and girls began to travel together more often, sometimes even twice a month. Janice showed interest in one of the boys from their elite team. His name is Henry Bishop, but everyone calls him Junior so that he is not confused with his father, Henry Bishop Sr. Do you see where this is going, Simon? Henry Sr. traveled with a team of boys as an escort, and it seems that the women of Adonias felt a mutual attraction to the men of Bishop. There were white women in the Bishop family. It turned out that Bishop Sr.'s mom was white, like Bishop Jr.'s. In the end, I found out that every night while traveling, the younger one looked into Janice's room, while Penny spent the night in the older one's room. It was a pretty nice arrangement, until one of the other parents took pity and warned me. I hired a private investigator and made inquiries about them the next time they left town. By the time they got back, I'd been moved into a spare bedroom, and Penny had been handed papers that week. Penny did her best to convince me that it only happened twice, which turned out to be a lie, and I went for a divorce. What really burned me the most was Janice's betrayal. So I left Oregon, moved here, and never looked back. I was probably looking at Larry with dazed, glazed eyes, trying to figure out how I ended up in such a den of vipers. He looked at me and continued his story almost ruthlessly. When I saw a Christmas card with a photo of your family and 2 children who didn't look like you, I made a couple of calls to my friends in the West. They did some digging for me and told me what they found out. I'm sorry to break the news to you, Simon, but most likely your 2 children are from Junior. I don't understand Larry. If she's messing with that asshole Henry, why didn't she just marry him? Why did you marry me and not him? Because, dear boy, both Henrys have a bad habit of screwing up and ending up in jail. The first time Henry Jr. was caught selling a shitty batch of illegal substances to an undercover cop. He was 20 years old and a sophomore in college, keen on basketball. But the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Just like Henry the Elder, the younger needed more money, cars, women, anything. As a result, he served 7 years because he did not cooperate, and he was carrying an illegal automatic weapon when he was arrested. My sources found out that he got out of prison about a year before your son was born. He screwed up before Jacob was born, served a second term on assault charges, and went back to prison for 18 months. Came out probably just in time for Janice to get pregnant with your little girl. I probably could have intervened after I found out what was going on, but I decided to stay away from it. After all, I didn't know you, and it didn't seem to be any of my business. I just thought you didn't mind what was going on. No, it's not okay at all. I can't believe what an idiot I've been for the last 4 years. How could I be so stupid? You're not stupid, Simon. You were just in love, and my ex-wife used it against you. As far as I understand, you're a damn good carpenter with a successful business. It takes brains. Let me tell you what I've learned over the years when I took so-called smart people fishing on my boat. Most of them know 1 or 2 things pretty well, and that's it. They use this knowledge as a shield. My ex and daughter used your dependence on them as a family and your trusting nature against you. Besides, the expert lied to you. Let me explain this. Like I said, Penny swore she only slept with Henry twice. I didn't believe her, so she said she would take a lie detector test. The damn fool passed the test. The woman who conducted the test asked this question several times, and the results were the same. Penny was telling the truth, but something seemed wrong to me, so I asked Janice to take a lie detector test. Penny was furious, calling me an asshole for putting my daughter through this ordeal. Janice obviously didn't have Penny's skills, at least not yet, and when she took the test, it turned out that 2 couples had been doing it for 5 months. Let it serve as a lesson if the two of them offered to take a test to make sure they're telling you the truth. I thank Larry for the information. He offered to buy me drinks and dinner, but I refused. It's time to go home and plan your next steps. I took the overnight pace to Portland and spent Wednesday working on my plans. The list I made 2 days ago was expanding to include hire a lawyer, get the evidence. Fred met me for dinner that night and gave me some great advice. He told me not to hire his lawyer, but to use the same lawyer-a-fighting dog that his Lee. He drank and expressed our condolences for several hours, and he let me spend the night at his house. One last night of messing with Janice. On Thursday, I made an appointment with a lawyer, transferred some money, arranged for a job outside the city for the next week, and bought 2 voice-activated dictaphones. I really didn't need the video. Besides, I didn't think I could stand to watch some weird guy using my wife, and listening would be bad enough. If I saw them doing this, I could just end up in jail. On Thursday evening, I returned home from my fake urgent business trip. Janice didn't think twice when I made up a story about a famous reality TV star I met. Everything I said was based on an article from People magazine that I bought at Miami Airport. Lying was getting too easy for me, but it wasn't fun anyway. Janice wasn't upset when I told her that I would be in Seattle for the next week doing work for some Microsoft millionaire, which was a real job. When she went to bed, I hid the recorder in the kitchen. The next day, I found the best place in the bedroom. I tested both devices and loaded my tools into a truck for the trip north. I immersed myself in my work. The Seattle customers turned out to be one of those wonderful couples with a great sense of design and an unlimited budget. I couldn't have chosen a better way to spend this otherwise shitty week. I arrived home on Sunday evening and had to wait until Monday morning to listen to the not recordings. It was bittersweet to listen. It's bitter because, as I expected, Janice and her boyfriend spend a week making love in the bedroom. Sweet, because I overheard Junior's one-sided conversation with someone else. It happened after Janice went into the shower. Here's what the recorder recorded. Hey bro, are you ready for this? I just scored a great score. Janice was at the clinic, and this elderly couple came in, all excited to get their vaccinations because they will be spending the next month in Israel. Janice got them talking and fed me enough to know it was going to be an easy walk. She looked at the couple's address, and it turned out that it was in a good area of the city. If you're at home, let me know. I'm going to inspect this place tomorrow. They're leaving next month. Whoever Junior was talking to, he must have agreed, because the rest of the conversation consisted of the two of them making plans to rob the establishment when the elderly couple left the country. My problem was whether I would turn Janice in when I turned Junior into the cops. It would have been fair if she had spent several years in prison, but I wasn't going to play the role of babysitter for a couple of kids who didn't belong to me. While both parents were fed 3 times a day, they watched TV all day. Okay, when I read stories about cuckold husbands, they always say that even if the children are not their biological children, he still loves them. Blah, blah, blah. Maybe my resentment was still too acute, but both of Janice's children, and that's how I was thinking about them right now, could go to prison with Janice. I don't give a damn about that. Most likely, this lying fool, my mother-in-law, can spend her golden years raising the offspring of her deception. I spent the next month trying to be polite and tiptoe around Janice as much as I could. The tape recorder stayed on, and I was out of town for work most of those weeks. Mother didn't pay attention to the fact that he was being recorded. He kept talking to his accomplice, and I had enough information to know when their big heist would take place. I was supposedly out of town on the night of the break-in, but instead I was sitting in a rented car down the street from my house. I followed the dumbass to the house of an elderly couple and waited until Junior and Dude, his friend, entered the place. I called the police from my unregistered burning phone and pretended to be a worried neighbor. As an officer, my neighbors are out of the country, and I just saw 2 men loading things from home into their van. It's a dark brown van with the following license plate. The van had just pulled out of the driveway and was heading south on Hiawatha Drive. I followed him and watched from 2 blocks away as 3 patrol cars surrounded the van and laughed as the 2 criminals were led away in handcuffs. I should be ashamed of what I'm going to tell you next, but for some reason I'm not. The night before the robbery, I drove a rented car to my neighborhood. It was the middle of the night and dark when I put the gun wrapped in oilcloth with the erased fingerprints under the driver's seat of Henry's van. I won't tell you where I got this gun from. Let's just say a good friend gave it to me, and I removed the serial number so it couldn't be traced. You see, Henry, being a criminal, actually twice convicted, has no right to have a firearm with him. Since this would be his third offense in a state with 3 strikes, and you're not free justice system, it would be decades before Henry was released from prison, if at all. I wasn't too worried about the planted gun, because Henry was robbing some poor couple's house. The gun was just insurance. Henry couldn't plead a misdemeanor. The first phase of my revenge has been completed. When I got home the next day, Janice was in the office, her eyes bulging. Her mom was sitting on the couch with her, hugging Janice. Uncle Henry was in my lazy boy opposite them. They all looked like death had come. "What's wrong, Janice? Why tears?" "Oh, Simon, I just found out that my very old friend is dying of cancer, and it's so terrible. Mom and Uncle Henry came to help me because I didn't know when you'd be home." When the words left her lips, I realized that Janice had received lessons in lying from her mother. It also became clear to me that one of my find out why questions would never be answered. Janice was too good a liar to give me a straight answer that I could believe in. "Well, Janice, this really sucks, and I'm sorry to break more bad news to you. But here are the divorce papers. It's over between us." I wish I had a camera to capture the expression on their faces when I said those words. It looked like something out of a bad comedy show with 3 open mouths and 6 bulging eyes. I will keep this memory for many years to come. I walked out the door without saying another word. He climbed into his pickup truck and headed southeast. Janice was supposed to be officially handed the documents the next day by someone from my lawyer's office. The copy I left her with the letter was just for my amusement. The letter said, "Janice, you're a lying fool. My lawyer will handle our divorce. I left you the house, but I withdrew all our money from our accounts, except for $3,000. You can pay the mortgage, bills, etc. After today, it's not my problem. I know that the children are not mine. I'll miss them, but I'll never be able to look at them without thinking about how you got pregnant. Maybe Henry can sell his ass in prison and help feed his 2 offspring. It's in your best interest not to dispute the terms of the divorce. I would hate to think that your children have both parents in prison and are being raised by your mother and Uncle Henry. I know that it was you who gave Junior the information about when this sweet old couple would leave the country. And if Henry doesn't give up on you, and if you don't agree to my terms, I will definitely call the police and tell them to check the records at your clinic to find out which nurse gave these couple injections and ask them when they would leave. Trust me, I'll do it in the blink of an eye and laugh while I make the call. Don't even think about trying to contact me in any way. From everything I've learned about you and your mother over the past month, I'd rather talk to a rabid dog than hear your lying voice again. I would wish you good luck, but I would be lying. Go to hell and tell that witch mother of yours that she can go there too. Simon, the second phase of my revenge has been completed. The third stage would have taken longer, but if my plans had worked, it would have been so funny. Over the past month, I have managed to acquire 2 colonies of termite ants. It's amazing what you can buy online. One day when we were at Penny's house, I sneaked down the stairs to her basement and planted 2 colonies in inconspicuous places. The ants will work their way through the rafters and walls over the next few years until the logs rot so much that the house will be impossible to save. Penny is such a lousy housewife that she'll never notice anything. Did I forget to mention that I've been responsible for all Penny's utility and household bills for the last 6 years? At that time, I paid every bill with a smile on my face because it was the least I could do for such a wonderful mother-in-law. The woman I thought was my surrogate mother. That was before I found out that she was part of a conspiracy to make me a cuckold. Now, since I was in charge of the bills, and since the house was not mortgaged, it was easy for me to cancel the insurance of the owner of her house, which I did in the same month. No one will know anything until they try to claim damages from the ants. Phase 4. The Sicilians are right. The best revenge is served cold. At least that's how it was for me. When I left that day in my truck, I had all the clothes, money, tools, and personal belongings I would need to start a new life. I went to the Florida Keys and Larry helped me sell my truck and buy a boat. It would have taken me several years to recover here in the Caribbean, but I had the resources to make it happen. I loaded my tools into my new, used 10-meter motorboat and headed for the islands. I spent the next 3 years living in a boat and doing my best to find odd jobs while doing finishing work on different islands. One of my former clients, a multi-millionaire Microsoft, bought a small island in the Bahamas, and I spent 4 months in his new home. I even decorated several interior spaces on 2 mega yachts owned by some Saudi princes. It's different here on the islands. There are many representatives of the working class or the poor, a small middle class, and a much smaller number of wealthy people. It took time, but my reputation began to strengthen among the wealthy people on different islands. It helped that my living expenses were relatively low. After 3 years, there was more money coming in than going out. And I had fun. Have you made love to me? Hell yes, you'd have to be a leper not to come here. So many women come to the islands in search of a pleasant time. Of course, many of these women want to enjoy their first native experience, but there are enough crumbs left for a white man's holiday. I was still in touch with a few friends in Portland, especially Fred, who has since reconciled with his ex-wife. All my friends were given clear instructions not to tell Janice where I was or give her my mobile number. In the second year after my escape, I convinced Fred and his wife Emily to meet me at St. Martin's to spend a week of vacation on my yacht. I was really looking forward to meeting an old friend. Imagine my complete shock when I drove up to the dock to pick them up. My ex-wife Janice was standing next to them. She looked absolutely stunning. Now in her early 30s, she still had the body of a 20-year-old girl, and she was wearing a bikini top and a pair of Daisy Dukes to accentuate those features. I stopped about 15 meters from the dock and backed up to walk another 30 meters before turning off the engine. My cell phone rang. It was Fred, of course. Fred, what the fuck? Why did you bring her here with you? Simon, it's not my fault. Janice has been asking Emily for information about your whereabouts. When she found out about our trip, she made Emily take her with us. Emily told me that if I didn't agree, I wouldn't have a bed for the next year. Well, Fred, you've kept your end of the bargain, so I'm glad you won't spend the next year dating your hand. But you won't set foot on my yacht this week, I am sorry. I suggest either going back home or if you decide to stay, try the casino hotel. They are usually not booked at this time of the year. Goodbye. When I hung up the phone, I heard screams from the dock. It looked like Emily and Janice were about to have a stroke. I called down to the galley. Kelly, can you come on deck? Kelly was a young lady I met last year at a party hosted by my Microsoft client. She teaches at a school in Florida and spent 3 weeks of summer vacation with me, traveling around the islands. And need I say that she is stunningly gorgeous. We were friends with privileges, and that's all we'll ever be. One day, she would definitely have become the wife of a millionaire, but she spent her 20-odd years sowing wild oats. When Kelly started to climb the ladder from the galley, I stopped her. Baby, do you mind if you take off your tank top before you go on deck? Kelly smiled mischievously as she took off her top. She was wearing my favorite bikini bottoms with a tiny triangle on the front and a thin stripe on the back. Do you want me to take off my swimming trunks too? No, it's too much. Kelly went up the ladder and stood on the deck. Do you see those 3 people standing on the dock? Could you please wave at them? A week later, I received an email from Fred apologizing and saying that he didn't blame me at all for what I had done. She and Emily spent a week on the island, but Janice flew home after spending the rest of that day in tears. So maybe I could consider this for the 4th stage. And maybe after reading this scene, you, the reader, might think that I'm done. But I'm not. As I said, the best revenge is served cold. It was my 4th year in the Caribbean, and I was doing renovations in St. Bart's for a wealthy French couple. I know that many Americans hate the French, but my experience has been very positive. I took the time to learn some French, and my feeble attempts at conversation were appreciated by those I met. The job was supposed to take me at least a month, and the owners returned home after the first week. 2 days later, their daughter appeared. I just looked at this woman, and my heart and mind just melted. I do not know what the French call it, but my Italian mother called it thunderstruck. Moreover, When this young lady was putting down her suitcases, she looked at me and smiled, with both lips and eyes. Bonjour, Musiana. My parents warned me that you would be working here, but assured me that everything would be fine as long as I didn't get in your way. I was close to answering that all I wanted in this world was for her to stand in my way. I'm sorry, mademoiselle. You're putting me at a disadvantage. You know my name, but I do not know yours. Did my parents tell you they were expecting me? No, I'm afraid not. Then please accept my apologies. I'm Simone. Let's say the word, and I'll rent a room in the city while you work. It won't cause much inconvenience. Please, mademoiselle, do not hesitate to stay here. Your parents didn't mind staying in the house while I was working. That is, if the noise from my work doesn't bother you. I spent the night in the guest house, but I can return to my boat at the marina if it's inconvenient for you. My parents told me that you were a polite person, and they would not have allowed me to come if they were worried about my safety. Please continue to use the guest house while you were here. In fact, I would probably be more comfortable knowing that there is a gentleman nearby. The next few weeks were something of a dream. Simone is a classic French woman, at least in the films I've seen, 160 centimeters tall, perfectly fitting on her slender figure, short black hair, and Audrey Tauth's face. She moved with the grace of a dancer. I was head over heels in lust, and most importantly, she was a wonderful person. Even though she grew up in a wealthy family, there was no arrogance in her. I was usually greeted at noon with lunch, which she cooked herself. She would join me on the patio and we would eat together. During our first lunch, we joked about the similarity of our names. Simone had a wonderful sense of humor, and I tried my best to make her smile or laugh, just to look at her joyful face. I continued to feel lust, and by the end of the second week, I was in love. She broke the deadlock. Simon, I see the way you're looking at me, and I'm sure I know what that means. I'm also sure that you realize the difference in our position in life, and I believe that's why you keep your distance. Let me tell you what I see. I see a wonderful man who has achieved success despite unpleasant events in his life that were beyond his control. They didn't turn you into an angry person. You're still looking for the joy of life. I know that I am beautiful and rich, but I have not achieved much on my own. I try to be a good, kind-hearted person and think about myself. I beg you, please don't consider yourself unworthy of me. Look at me as a woman who has fallen in love with a handsome man. How could I be so lucky? This incredible woman asked me to give her a chance. I didn't give her a chance to change her mind. I immediately took her in my arms and kissed her. We kissed for a few minutes before she said, "Let's go to your room." We made love. I took every opportunity, everything Janice had ever taught me about how to please a woman. I smiled when she screamed, "Oh my God," over and over again. This went on for several hours until we both fell asleep from exhaustion. I could probably forget about it. I was so happy with my new life, but the Colt had the last cartridge left. 5 years after marrying Simone, 10 years since I broke up with Janice, I mailed Janice a photo from our house in Paris. It was a picture of me, Simone, and our 2 children. Yes, we went through the process of artificial insemination done a year earlier when we were visiting Simone's parents in St. Barth. As always, Simone looked simply dazzling in her bikini, and Jules and Juliet showed off their radiant smiles. The caption read, "Me, my fiancé, and my 2 wonderful children wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year." The 4th stage is completed. I'm going to go back to the next stage. I'm going to go back to the next stage. I'm going to go back to the next stage. I'm going to go back to the next stage. I'm going to go back to the next stage. I'm going to go back to the next stage. I'm going to go back to the next stage. I'm going to go back to the next stage. I'm going to go back to the next stage. I'm going to go back to the next stage. I'm going to go back to the next stage. I'm going to go back to the next stage. I'm going to go back to the next stage. I'm going to go back to the next stage.